generations in a family tree. So some families have short generations, some families have longer generations. I've got a cousin who jokes that they get in about 4 generations every 200 years on average. They've had some older parents, not that much older, but a lot of them have reproduced in their 40s versus another branch of our family where everybody's had their babies at 18 or 20. They fit in more generations. So, that matters in terms of how long it takes to form a big, complicated family tree. And forming a family tree this big and this complicated that goes back this far takes a heck of a long time. And we said that the scale of time was long, and we went out and proved it on paper towels. We'll get that fixed, and we'll get the other ones hung up too. But it's long. It's insanely long. And looking at your recall quiz results, I think you have a pretty good idea. But the Earth is old. 4.6 billion, 4.56. Depends on how we do our rounding. Old. Over 4.5 billion years old. And it's really hard for us to conceive of how long that is. It's hard to wrap our brains around. It's also hard to imagine that the early Earth did not look like the beautiful little planet that you and I know and are so fond of. It was hot and molten and gassy because it was freshly formed from collided bits of space debris. There wouldn't have been any water on it. It would have looked like some sort of weird volcanic landscape. Smashed together, no solid rocks, not a hospitable place at all. And as a matter of fact, if we look up here, we say that just over 4 billion years ago, we have the oldest piece of rock. So it took nearly 500 million years just for the Earth to cool down enough to start having solid rock grains that we can find. Now, it's probable that there were rocks on Earth earlier than that, but Earth has this weird thing about destroying the evidence. Our rocks get recycled, if you remember the rock cycle from middle school. So rocks get remelted all the time. So we don't have older rocks than that. But it still took a while for there to be solid rock cooled down to a point where we could call it rock. Now, the statistic on this is funny. We say, about 3.5 billion years ago. Your timeline says about 3.8 billion years ago. We see the first evidence of life. And I'll happily cross that out and say 3.8. And what's interesting is that life doesn't look, and I had a few people who drew little people, drew little dinosaurs, somebody drew a gorgeous nautilus, that wasn't on here, and somebody here drew a plant. Those are wonderful. It's not at all what the earliest life looked like. The earliest life looked a lot like modern bacteria. And what's really interesting, have you ever heard anybody say science is emerging? It's emerging understanding. What I hate most the idea that science is this body of facts and we're going to teach you all the facts and then you know science. Science changes all the time. And that 3.8 billion years ago for the earliest life forms may have just shifted because, interestingly enough, if we look at some current research, some folks have just found stuff that looks older. And, it looks a lot like that. And I think it pushes it back, probably not, but about 100,000 years. But, still. And if you want to know what those early evidences of life look like, look a lot like that. Ah! Well, that didn't work. There, no. They look a lot like that. Now, that is looks like a dime there for scale. No matter what the coin is, this is pretty small. And these are banded iron deposits. There are some that have been found in Australia. I'm not sure where these were found. Chunk of ancient ocean floor. I will probably link this article. There's going to be an extra credit opportunity that I'll be posting this week to do annotations on some articles that deal with topics that we're doing in this unit to get you some background. And this will probably be one of them. But I think this find pushed the clock back on earliest life found by a couple 100,000 years, which isn't a lot, but it's still earlier than when we found. And these structures are made of iron and silica. And they have little tubes in them, which we find also in modern bacteria. So it's not all that interesting. It's not like pretty fossils of fish or pretty fossils of plants. But if you know what you're looking at, it's pretty cool. And then about 600 million years ago, 0.6 billion years ago, we get animals. And these are not like anything you've ever seen. These are like something out of a horror movie. These are like something out of the most terrifying alien, outer space, crazy stuff movie you've ever seen. These are animals that look like plants and plants that look like animals and things that look like monsters from your nightmares. Things that look like 2-foot-long bugs. Animals, distinctly animals, related to you and I, kingdom Animalia, most of them went extinct. Most of them disappeared. They don't exist on this planet anymore, and most of them didn't even leave ancestors existing. So they're pretty crazy. There's actually a nice supplement in your book about these creatures out of the Burgess Shale, which was a formation in which a lot of these crazy things were found. So that's about 0.6 billion years ago. I like rooting for the home team, and the home team for me is mammals. Woohoo! Okay, we can get more specific than that, but, you know, in a larger sense, go mammals. I always feel like when I look at bats flying, I think, yay, flying mammal, because, you know, they can fly and I can't. So about 300 million years ago, mammals show up. When we go to the Carnegie, I will give a bonus point if you can find the mammal in the dinosaur exhibit, because there is one. And it looks an awful lot like that. And it's about this big, and it's your ancestor. It's adorable. It's not a mini you, but it's a mini mammal. They look kind of like shrews. They were probably fairly vicious. They were really tiny. The problem when they arrived on the scene was that there were these larger life forms who were kind of taking up a whole lot of space and a whole lot of calories. That would be the dinosaurs. But yeah, mammals. Little tiny mammals. So 0.3 billion years ago, we get mammals. And then, and I'm following a particular track of logic here, because, you know, home team is great, but I really like dogs. And about 1 million years ago, these guys show up on the scene. Wolves. Oh, they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous. Stunning creatures. They've been around for about 1 million years. However, you don't want one of these sleeping at the foot of your bed. It's a very bad idea. You especially don't want one of these sleeping at the foot of your toddler's bed, because they will eat your toddler with no looking back or sideways or up or down. Crunch. However, about 20,000 years ago, we get these guys. Aww. Aww. Dogs. 20,000 years ago. Who has a dog? Who has seen a dog? Okay, good. If you don't have a dog, you've seen a dog. You know what they are. Domestic canid life form. Friendly, cuddly, alternately very smart and really, really dumb. Yeah. I've met some stupid dogs. I've met some brilliant dogs, and I've met some really stupid dogs. I had one really stupid dog. But anyway, 20,000 years ago, these guys show up. Now, why did I go down the canid line and not the primate line or the maple tree line, the plant line? Well, that's a surprise for later. I've got a little thing that we'll touch on towards the end as kind of a bonus that's more about dogs and the artificial selection of dogs. Dogs did not evolve naturally. They were bred by humans. And instead of natural selection, which we talked about already, that's artificial selection, where humans chose particular individuals. So we will talk about that. But, you know, that's a little snapshot. We've marched through this timeline. By the time we get to dogs, we're in that last, like, what, 1.5 centimeters that you tried to squeeze everything into. Which gets us back to our question. What is evolution? Whoops, somehow I hit pause. I don't know how much of that I missed, but evolution is really just a shift in traits over generations, and those traits are caused by genes. So it's really a shift in the genes that are present over time. For instance, the gene that allows you and I to produce fur in only selected spots on our bodies versus the gene that allows other primate species to produce fur all over our bodies. We would not need winter coats if we still had the genes to produce fur all over our bodies. The genes that allow you and I to keep warm in the winter, to have multiple mechanisms internally to maintain homeostasis, versus a snake who can't, versus a reptile who can't. So bunches of little tiny differences, bunches of little changes, little genes, given enough time, we certainly had a lot of time, can add up to big differences. So what we're going to do is start a lab looking at human variation. And I'm going to pass this out. 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want you to do is read that first paragraph, and you've got a few pre-lab questions. Pre-lab questions. You can discuss them in your group, but you have to answer in your own words. And then we're going to break up into teams of 2, 2, 2, and only 2, and we have an even number today, so this should work. And in those teams of 2, you're going to take whatever measurement it is that you have chosen to measure, and your implements of measurement destruction are all up here. I'll add a picture of those for the benefit of those who are not here. You've got meter sticks, rulers, yarn, scissors, little fuzzy wuzzy things. I can't remember what they're called right now. These things, pipe cleaners. You got all of that, and there's more scissors. I'll get those out. With those instruments, you're going to measure whatever it is that you have to measure. Now, be very careful about your measurement technique. If you're doing handspan and you have somebody measure their handspan and their hands up like this versus somebody else who's flat, you're going to get very different measurements, and it's a result of your bad technique. If you're doing wingspan, and one person's wingspan is measured with their arms forward of their shoulders, and another person's back, and another person's flat in line, you're going to get lousy numbers. You're free to use the board. That's really helpful for height and for wingspan. Arm span, wingspan, same thing, you know what I meant. You can have them stand out there and mark the tips of their fingers. If you're measuring to the tip of the index finger for wingspan on one person and the tip of the middle finger on another, you're going to get bad numbers. So make sure your numbers are really good. Also, you are measuring in what units? Centimeters. This is science, folks. We don't measure in inches. So centimeters are on this side. You had lots of practice using the metric side of the meter sticks when you were doing your timelines. These also have inches and centimeters. Hey, the two of you, zip it. Measure in centimeters. Measure precisely. Don't give me 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters. You can go down to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8. Those are the millimeters. Use them. You got them? Use them. So I expect to see good decimal numbers for your measurements. I'm not going to believe you if they're all whole numbers. I'm going to make you start over. Horrors. So you have to get everybody in this room all their measurements. It's a lot of measurements. If you look on the back, you'll notice that there's a very large table. If we have extra time, I will dispatch you to places where there might be spare humans who you can measure dimensionally. So, do you understand what you're doing?
Yes.
Do you know who your partner is?
No.
Do you know what you're measuring?
Yes.
Probably.
Go.